Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Diana Birch. I'm Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Cultural Engagement here at the University of Liverpool, and I'm honoured to be here today to welcome you to what is, alas, and I can hardly believe this, the final event of this year's Liverpool Literary Festival. But we're going to end on a high. So the festival's main sponsors are Student Roost and Bruntwood, and we are very grateful for their support. So just one practical point. Could I ask you please to wait for our speakers to leave the theatre before you do, so that they can get downstairs to Blackwell's Festival bookstall, and there you will be able to buy Adele's books, which she'll be very pleased to sign for you. We are going to leave time for questions from you at the end of this event, but when we reach that point, please wait for the microphone to reach you. There will be roving mics so that everyone can hear you. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Jim Parks, and he is going to introduce his wife.
It's no pressure, obviously, introducing my wife. Now, in theory, I should know this, but I do write it down so I don't make a fool of myself. So obviously, it's fabulous to be here. Thank you for joining us on this final event. And I've got to say, Liverpool know how to put on a festival, people. Oh my goodness, they do it so well. So, on to the main event with the fabulous Adele Parks.
How many times he says fabulous? It's just,
Yeah, on best behaviour, obviously. So, my wife, Adele Parks, she has written 22 books in 22 years. Every single one of them has been in the top 10 Sunday Times bestseller lists. Many of them have been number one. She sold over 4.5 million copies of her work in the English language and have been translated into, and this is where the update is, now 31 different languages. And on top of all of that, at the beginning of this year, she was also very privileged to receive from Her Majesty the Queen the honour of MBE at the New Year's Eve honours list. So please can we give a lovely Liverpool Literary Festival finale to Adele Parks. I always embarrass her as well. So Adele, we are going to start with One Last Secret, which is your current book. But before we do, I'll just let everyone know it was released in hardback in the summer. It's been another Sunday Times bestseller, as I already mentioned.
I don't know why he's rolling his eyes. I mean,
another Sunday Times bestseller. Oh my God, she's done it again. It's an absolutely cracking novel, which we're going to dig into. But I'm just going to have a couple of words from some fellow authors as to what they make of it. The lovely Peter James, who I'm sure many of you know, describes One Last Secret as original and utterly compelling. Karen Slaughter, she was a big fan because she thinks it's got a whip-smart protagonist, immensely satisfying twists and turns, and a powerful emotional undercurrent. And then the adorable Lisa Jewell says it's absolutely gripping. This is revenge lit at its best, provocative and compelling, and I was left breathless at the final twist. So, on to the story and the twists and turns that are in it. One thing that I'm going to start with, because this is a hilarious conversation in our house, everyone knows that Adele takes her research very seriously. It's often commented on in reviews and articles that she really gets under the skin of her characters. The lead character in One Last Secret is a high-end escort. So I'm intrigued to see what she says in the company of others. Adele, what did you do for your research into high-end escorting?
It was a bit of an issue because I quite often shadow the protagonist's jobs. So if I'm going to have a protagonist that's, I don't know, a banker, I will find somebody who's a banker and I say, can I come in and shadow you for a couple of weeks? And it's actually one of the joys and privileges of being a writer. You get to be other people. So when I started talking about this book to my friends and family and said, oh, I'm going to do a high-end escort, Jim's like, well, I think you just need to, stop, have a think. I don't want shadowing of this particular career. But actually, I wanted to approach it in more or less the same way I would any other career, because the whole point of me choosing an escort for my latest psychological thriller is, as anybody who reads in this genre will know, quite often in any kind of crime book or thriller book, the escort, the sex worker, is often already a dead body in the background, or she might be a silent person wrapped around a pole. I meant, as I said that came out so badly, and this has been recorded, I meant like a lap dancing pole, just so we're clear. But anyway, you're kind of there. Anyway, the point is, they're voiceless and silent, and I thought that was wrong and unfair, and I like writing difficult, tricky heroines, and always have for the 20-odd years, even when I wrote in very different genres, easier genres, as some people would wrongly assume. But so I decided I would approach it in exactly the same way. So I put in a search in my Google, which was just, sex workers near me. This is what I tell Jim, anyway, is I had to write a whole blinking novel to explain my search engine. No, I didn't. And then I reached out to about 5, but 3 of them responded, because I think 2 of them thought I was probably joking. And I said, this is my website, this is the kind of books I write, this is the tone I will hit. Do you think you would like to have a conversation with me? And it turns out women are keener to sit and be paid to talk about sex than be paid to actually have sex. So, no surprise there, people. So that's what I did. For my research, I met up with local escorts. We live in Guildford, Surrey, and everyone thought it was posh until I started writing this book.
Yes, and you'll be surprised. But talking about being surprised, obviously talking to the 3 women you did talk to, aside from getting into sort of, the practicalities of transactional side of the business, let's say, what were the ladies like? What was surprising to you, or what was normal to you when you had the conversations and meetings with them?
What I thought I was meeting about were the technicalities of this job. So I wanted to know, how you got paid and what you got paid and how you kept yourself safe, which is a huge issue in this profession. But actually, what I found? They're women doing jobs. Yeah. There was discussions about sort of, one of them had children, so childcare, and it's flexible, she told me. Well, yes. I mean, let's face it, it isn't a job that you would choose if you had a number of choices. No. But the women were humorous. They were, they found the humor in what they were doing. They were tenacious. They were different to one another as well. They were just women, doing a job that most of us wouldn't want to do.
No. But the most of the book, majority, but by no means all, is from Dora's point of view, your lead's point of view. Can you tell us a little bit about the sort of the challenges or differences between writing from a single point of view versus multiple, which I know you've done many times before in other novels?
Yes. I usually have multiple points of view, and technically, that's quite fun, because some characters know some things and others don't, and you as a reader get to know everything. If you have a single person's point of view, you as a reader will probably only know what she's telling you, and if you're a discerning reader, and you all look very discerning, if you're discerning readers, you will be also reading between the lines and working out what she's not telling you. I found it's more restrictive. People think it's almost easier to have a single character and a single point of view. But in fact, it can be very restrictive because they can be lying to themselves or to you. And also because we all only have a limited knowledge. We only do know what we know. We don't know what we don't know. Yeah. That happens with your characters. So, and also I wanted to do a backstory for Dora. I think it's really important for you to keep your sympathy with Dora. And I'm asking a lot of my readers to sympathize with the sex worker. So I needed to explain the backstory, but without her sounding self-pitying. Yeah. And that's tricky, that's complicated, because she's not the type to justify or think, woe is me, although she's very entitled to think, woe is me. She does go through an awful lot as a character. But I didn't want her to suddenly say to us, to the readers, I've had a really terrible time, and this is why I'm where I am. But I want you to understand that. So yes, there were definitely challenges, which actually Jim's being quite kind of interviewee here, because he knows there are challenges, because what happens is my books are about 100,000 words long, and at 60,000 words approx, so sort of 2/3 in, I will walk into Jim's office. We both work from home. I will walk into Jim's office and I'll say, well, this is the one where they all discover I can't write, and it's a disaster, and it's rubbish, and you know it's fallen off tracks, and I planned so carefully and it's gone wrong, and I'm not even going to finish. We're going to give the money back. And he tells me two things at that point. One, usually we've spent the money.
It's gone.
So it's gone. You really are going back in the office. And two, it was a few years ago, he sort of reached for an old diary, went, yep, hang on, yep. 7th of March, last year you said the same thing.
You were flopped on my sofa, saying exactly the same thing.
It's 10th of March, you're saying the same thing. It's about now in your schedule, you lose confidence. And I think that sometimes comes from the sort of tricky 2/3 of the way through, because of the voice, and particularly if it's a lone voice. So actually, long answer to say, multiple viewpoints are quite good fun.
They are. But I just, on the single point of view thing, you just said something which reminded me, one of the sort of, not necessarily themes perhaps, but you can tell me perhaps it's, but something that takes place in this book which is challenging with the point of view is sort of gaslighting, and whether or not Dora is reliable in the information she's presenting to us as a reader, because we're hearing her presentation. That must be tricky.
Yeah, well, I'm obsessed with how reliable we all are. Anyhow, as this is how I break it to him. That would be news, wouldn't it? This is how she ended the festival. No.
Turns into a couples therapy session.
It's been great, but no. But I'm even when we really want to be honest and really are trying to be as honest as we possibly can about something. Memories are, fallible. We self-protect, maybe because we're embarrassed by something, maybe because we're ashamed of something, maybe because we're actually really proud of something but we don't want to show off, so we sort of don't always give an accurate account. We never give an accurate account. And so actually writing characters that don't give an accurate account, or even are trying to but maybe can't, is a really interesting thing to write. But yes, there are things that happen to Dora. I'll give you a bit of a précis of the book without spoiling it. It's no spoilers, so it's still worth buying.
We will see you downstairs afterwards.
But the idea is she is in this profession. She has an encounter that is awful, and she decides her best friend proposes to her, and he is wealthy, and he is one of the only people on the planet she cares for, genuinely cares for, and he says, I've always been in love with you, let's get married, but you have to give this up. I cannot live with knowing you're in this danger, and I don't want a wife doing this job. I don't think that's unreasonable. I think that's where most of us would pitch out. So she agrees that she will give it up. He goes away on business, and an old, very reliable, lovely client of hers gets in touch and says, I need you to escort me It's this gig in the south of France. Everyone else is a couple. It's a platonic thing. You don't need to come other than pretending to be my friend. Will you do it? And she agrees to it, but it turns out not to be that at all. And she walks into an incredibly dangerous, extraordinary set of circumstances that are tricky to understand what's going on. And so she doesn't know what she is trying to tell us because it is unfolding for her at the same time. I knew. I'm a bit of a plotter.
You are a bit of a plotter, yes, absolutely. Well, why don't we touch on that whilst you're talking about plotting, about process, because I do know, because I do share your space, but no one else in this room does, I don't believe, unless I'm unaware of someone hiding underneath our sofa. But you are a very good planner. So can you tell a little bit about the process you go through, sort of plotting and planning and the structure in which you sort of tackle a new book?
Yes, I mean, this isn't the only way to write a book. There are literally the number of authors there are about the number of ways to write a book, from what I understand, 22 years into my career, from going to events and listening myself and talking to my friends. Some people, there's this phrase, and I'm sure you all know it, are you a plotter or a planner? They start asking you that when you're at uni, or younger perhaps. But generally speaking, some people, are you a plotter or a pantser? Are you somebody who plots or a seat of pants? I am definitely a plotter. I like to know where things are going. I think each word in my book works harder if I know where I want to end up. And also because I write psychological thrillers, which quite often are dependent on elaborate twists or turns, or actually very simple twists or turns, but they have to be hidden, and they have to be real, and they have to be real enough for you not to say to me, oh, that wouldn't happen in real life. So there's quite a number of layers that have to be achieved there. So I like to plan out my books, and I like to know what's going to happen, but not chapter by chapter, because then I would get bored. I live in Guildford, we've already mentioned that, we live in Guildford. My mum and dad live in Teesside. So I always say it's like going for a journey between Guildford and Teesside, which I do regularly, and sometimes I can go straight up the M1, and that's the way it is, and other times I can do A roads and stop off at my friends' houses, and either way it works as long as I know I'm getting to my mum and dad's at the end of it. And my book is a bit like that. I will always know where I'm going to finish, and where the character will end up, what his or her arc will be, but I will have a few surprises along the way. Even the characters will surprise me,
yes.
Which makes me sound slightly balmy because I'm making them up, but they still can.
Well, talking of slightly balmy, one thing which is...
Where's that one going, Jim?
One thing that is fascinating, and it always amuses me because you do come in and tell me these things, is the process of developing character. And it's again, many of your fans and many sort of reviewers pick up on very sort of well-rounded, complex, realistic people with all the warts and all the flaws, but they're always very believable. And can you tell us a little bit the process you go through to develop complex, realistic, layered characters?
I don't do what people assume writers do. People often ask writers, do you base it on your friends and family? Well, no, because it'd be a really good way of losing your friends and family, because most people don't see themselves the way we perhaps see each other. And to keep me on that, make sure I answer the question. He knows I'm, as a woman of a certain age that might forget that question by the time I give you the sidebar, bring me back. But for instance, my very first book was called Playing Away. It's not about football, so it's quite clear what it was about. And a really lovely friend of mine, Emma, said to me, oh my God, you've written my book. And I was really shocked because she's married to Lorcan, who's another really good friend of mine. And I said, have you had an affair? She went, no. And I went, well, how can this be your book if you haven't had an affair? There's nothing in this book other than an affair. And she said, no, it's absolutely, other than the affair, this book is absolutely me. I'm in every single line in this book. And I thought, she's just not. Anyway, the next book came out, and I had this heroine, Jocasta, who was in TV, and a madam, absolutely hard work. And Emma, who is sweetness and light, said, "You're right, I was not Connie, I'm Jocasta." I was like, I don't want to break it to you, but you're really soft, and it's not like that. You're not like this at all. And she's like, no, it's entirely me. It's really nice you trying to protect me, but it's really me. So by the third book, my friends were like, oh, put Emma out of her misery, stick Emma in one of your books. So I called the character Emily. She was married not to Larkin, but to, I don't know, Lawrence, and they had the same amount of kids and all that. And she read the third book, and she went, yeah, I'm not in this one, am I?
She just couldn't see it.
So she couldn't see it. And honestly, I described her and her nature, her personality, as well as her physicality. But she was saying, so people want to be in my books, or they think they do.
Yeah.
But I don't put my friends and family, because I think in real life, people are still living their stories, and none of us break up our real lives in convenient beginning, middle, and ends, which I really need for psychological thrillers with twisty turns. But what I do is, first of all, as a starting point, I quite often sort of magpie pick from people I meet briefly. So if it's somebody who doesn't give me their full life story, but had an impact on me, and I just think, oh, maybe it was their physicality that was really impactful for me, or maybe they had a particular accent or a particular, I don't know, mannerism, or they told me a story that was quite personal. I might pick up on that, but then, and this is the bit where you think I'm slightly mad.
Back to the balmy bit.
You think I'm a bit balmy doing this? I think it's perfectly said.
Works a treat.
Works a treat. I interview my characters. Now, I don't draw up a chair and have them sat opposite me. But I do have a whole document full of, I don't know, maybe there's 100 questions in there now. And I pick my main character, and often 2 or 3 others, and I need to know them. I always say as well as my best friend, because I think, our best friends, especially if they're a long-term best friend, you know them warts and all. And I will ask my characters, obviously I'm going to need to know their name and age and sexuality and race, and then I start saying things like, so go on, in your family, how many kids are there, and where are you and are you the oldest child, are you the youngest child? That might not make it into the book. I might want to know their birth time. Probably not going to make it into the book, because that's weird. But I want to know these things. And then I'll start saying to the character, what are you most proud of? What are you most ashamed of? Do you have a secret that no one else knows about? Or do you have a secret that only one other person knows about? And if you do, what is it? And I will write up all the answers. And as I'm going through this process, I start hearing their voice very, very clearly. So for instance, with Dora, when I was asking Dora, and I worked out that she was from the former Yugoslavia, and she'd come across with her parents when she was a baby, escaping from a war. She'd settled in the north of England. So I knew kind of her background. And then I was like, oh, okay, Dora, let's bring you up to date, which is why he thinks I'm insane, because I am having this conversation in my head. So I'm like, let's bring you up to date, and I don't know why I went in with this one, because I wouldn't normally necessarily go in with any one of my questions. I don't do 1 to 10, I just pick them. I said, what's the thing you're most ashamed of? Well, obviously she's a sex worker, there's a few. So she turned around and said to me, well, I'm not telling you, we're not good enough friends. And I thought, oh, I like that. And actually, that's very early on in the book. She tells you as readers, I'm not ready to tell you that yet. I will tell you if you stay with me. Yeah. And I thought, oh, yeah, I'm getting this woman. She's not like me, who literally will sit and tell you everything. She is somebody who is a bit reserved because she has had to protect herself. Yeah. So I started to understand her that way. So I think it is the long interview process. I think about my characters for months before I start writing about them. Okay. I start thinking about books in sort of August, September, October, start planning them, but I won't put pen to paper or fingers to typewriter, fingers to keyboard until January now. And by then I'm itching to get on with these characters and get on with this plot. We've usually had quite a few maritals by this point, haven't we? Because I'm not in a very good mood, because I'm so desperate to write.
Desperate
but
to
it
get going.
Means it works better for me because I'm clear about where I'm going.
Yes, absolutely.
You'd quite like me to start a bit earlier, wouldn't you, love?
Sometimes, but but to be fair, doing a book every single year is a mammoth task. So you can't always start on the same date and finish on the same date because every book takes its own journey, I'm sure.
Yeah, but I more or less do start on the same. I mean, I would quite like, in my perfect world, I would start it at the beginning of December, but inconveniently they dropped in December, like Christmas.
Yeah,
And I don't know about everyone else, but that seems, and I'm just airing this in public with my husband, that seems to be my job. So so it gets to January. He's about to go, next question.
My job's on like the 23rd when it's like a mountain of excellent presents you bought the entire family and it needs to be wrapped.
He does wrap.
So I do the wrapping, so
it's
something.
Because I'm cooking. Just saying. Anyway, I think we should move on before they...
Let's stick on
We do love each other, really.
Let's stick on the sort of writing process though, because I've got another one here somewhere about it, which is about sort of writing very, again, realistic but believable dialogue. I know because we do a lot of these festivals, and sometimes lots of our author friends, they quite often will say they openly sort of struggle writing sort of effective dialogue and realistic dialogue on the page and making it sound real to the readers' minds. We have a rather different approach to dialogue, I don't know, life-bringing process, I suppose, which is quite interesting to share.
I mean, there's a couple of things. I think, first of all, and I'm being recorded, and I know in this room, this probably is a really successful thing to say, but it's recorded so it could go anywhere, it could go globally, and it's probably less successful everywhere else. I was going to say, dialogue comes easier to Northerners. Just as we talk more. So, we're quite chatty, we chat to more people, you listen in, and I think that is your starting point with dialogue as a writer. Listen to other people, listen to what they're saying to you, and listen to what they're not saying to you, because actually what they're not saying to you is probably more interesting for your book anyhow. But obviously in real life, I mean, even now when I'm being semi-formal, I'm trying to be coherent, I'm trying to answer,
Succeeding, sure.
Trying to answer questions, but I lose my train of thought, I might sort of answer something else, because that's how real people speak. That doesn't work in a book, let alone some people who might say, you know what I mean, and actually you do know what I mean, but if I put that in a book, it probably wouldn't translate. So, but if I formally explain everything that I mean, and somebody else is reading that book, they think, gosh, no one talks to each other like that. That's too stiff. So it's somehow getting in between. This is why he is a saint, really. I read my book aloud to Jim. It's just a really, really helpful...
It's my happy time.
It can be, it can sometimes not be. So I read it at a third of the way through, and quite often at that point, he isn't required to say anything because his face gives it away. And I'll go, right, well, okay, you don't like it. It's obvious. And actually, he hasn't said anything, but that usually means I don't like it, or I haven't cracked it, or I know I need to do more. Or other times, I'll look at him and go, it's a winner, isn't it? We're absolutely flying. This is great. Then I will read it to you at the miserable 2/3 of the way through part, where he has to give me a pep talk, because at that point, I probably want to give up. And he points out, we wouldn't eat. So, it's a really great idea to keep going. And then I read it right at the end. But actually reading aloud very much helps dialogue.
Yes, because if anything sounds a bit clunky when it's said aloud, when you say it to me, you can tell if it sounds like a real conversation or not.
Completely, and you can work out if you want contractions or you don't, or you've over-explained it, or is the accent correct, or that sort of thing.
I think it's a little bit like the way that screenplays and screenplay writers always have a table read before they do anything else, so they can refine it, because when everyone is sitting around saying their words, it's like, oh, that's a bit wooden, or that's a bit rough, or doesn't sound, on brief.
And also, and it is something that I have struggled with throughout my career, I write as as a northerner, as a Teessider. So, newsflash, Teessiders pronounce and say things differently to my editors in London. And so they will say to me, well, that's incorrect grammar. And I'm going, maybe, but it's also the way a northerner would explain this situation and say it to each other. And I don't want the Queen's received English for this character, because it isn't realistic for this character and it will jar. So there's things like that as well. Not that, and also, the caveat to that is I really can't bear reading E by gum or something ridiculous like that, because I don't think I've ever met anyone who says E by gum, and you see that as well. So it's just having a non-patronising but quite realistic way of...
No, good point. When you said about, writing believable characters, and you've been doing it a long time and developing this process, one thing that has changed over time is, and if you're more recent fans of Adele's, you might not know this, but she has written multiple different genres. So you've done early sort of almost romantic comedies, and then relationship dramas, historical fiction, and then in the past sort of 6, 7, 8 years maybe, much more psychological thrillers and domestic noir type territory. Has your process changed as you sort of moved on to more darker subject matter and more challenging scenarios? Does it change the way that you approach the material?
Oddly, writing murders or, police procedure or sex work or something, it's easier, honestly, than writing relationship dramas, because you have a sort of propelling plot, because you have something that doesn't happen to many people. So people are prepared to just think, well, maybe this is how sex workers think, maybe this is how murderers think. If you're writing about someone falling in love, we all have a personal experience of that, or if we're lucky, we do. So, or many of us have, we've all loved somebody, you've all loved your parents or your children or something. So anything in the earlier books, in fact, was harder to write in many ways, emotionally, because people come with their own experiences and judge it. So my process was quite similar in so much as the discipline is exactly the same. There's a misconception that writing romantic comedy is easy. Writing comedy is very difficult, or that it's light. That's not true either. Writing about love is actually very deep, and not making it schmaltzy is a fine line. So I think I was equally hard on myself across all of my genres. And also, we talked about earlier on about my research. Yeah. I've researched equally thoroughly in all of my genres. So, for instance, when I wrote about a heroine who was a florist, and I gave her the idea of being a florist because I had, my favourite film when I was a little girl was My Fair Lady. I love, the whole Eliza Doolittle story, and I thought being a florist was a great romantic idea. Turns out, no, you get up at the crack of dawn, your hands are freezing, and you get lots of little cuts because of stupid roses. It's not a fun job. And also, it's a really, but I did it because you do it to kind of do the research. And but the other funny thing about that is I hadn't realized how emotionally involving it is being a florist, because people are coming best time of their life, maybe because they've got a baby or a wedding, but also people come because they're putting funeral flowers together, or not that I was the florist because I had 2 weeks in the back washing buckets, but I was still there. But I wouldn't have known that about my character if I hadn't done the job. So it was just as thorough a process in any genre. I think the most notably different was Spare Brides, which is set in the 1920s, and If You Go Away, which is set in World War I, about a conscientious objector. Spare Brides is about the excess of women after World War I, 1 million women of marrying age who couldn't marry because there weren't men of marrying age, and that had previously been the designated career. What did they do with their lives? And then the other one, as I say, was about a conscientious objector. I haven't lived in that time, obviously. I mean, I can't understand why you didn't all rush to point that out. So there was a lot of different research, because I would suddenly think in my plot, oh, well, there'd be a telephone call, and then I think, oh, did they have a telephone? Would that person of that social status have a telephone? And it would maybe take, 2 days research to find out the right person that could tell me, no, actually, they wouldn't have had a phone there. They would have had one in the village, and people would go and take the message and send it down the street or whatever it would be. Or I'd think, oh, a telegram is going to arrive that day, and then I'd have to research for days to find out telegrams came on a Sunday. Somebody would categorically tell you, no, they didn't. And someone else would say, except during the war. And you think, well, it is during the war. So there was a lot of, the process changed a bit more then.
Yes.
There was a lot more emphasis on research.
Yes, because I remember you're still doing a book every year, but the research of those carried
4
over
years.
all the way through
Yeah,
whilst you're writing other titles.
Correct. I was writing other things because it was taking me so long to finally pull it together.
Obviously, the newer novels, in particular, One Last Secret, and more recently, Both of You, and titles like that, they are known for having twists and surprises and final reveals. What's it like trying to surprise a reader? Is it something you feel under pressure to do, or constantly do? In this genre, because it's a thing?
Well, in this genre, psychological thrillers and crime and all of that is a completely interesting genre to me, completely different, because you hear people saying, well, I'm writing sort of murder mysteries. There's a body at the beginning, and the whole book is about whodunit. Mine aren't really like that. My books are about what has actually been done and why. I still, whilst I am, plot is so important to psychological thriller, I am very character driven. I think in life, we all just sort of bumble through it because of what we do to each other. And I literally mean, parents choose to birth you. In my book, somebody might choose to kill you. But everything that happens to us is because another human chooses to do.
The interplay between the people.
Yes, the interplay. So for me, in my psychological thrillers, the fun of it is I am telling my readers new things all the time. And some of the readers will guess some of the things. Some of the readers will guess all of the things, and some of the readers will guess none of the things. My job is for you to be equally entertained no matter where you are on that scale. But I've noticed reviewers and bloggers who are particularly excited about waiting for a twist, and I have become kind of known for it, and they wait for, it's an Adele Parks twist right at the end. She delivers that final punch, you think you've got it, and then she gives you something else. And so, rather riskily, in the book that I've just put in for next year, there isn't an end of book twist, and I don't want it to be, because I don't want it to get ludicrous.
Constantly do it, yeah.
And I don't want it to be a kind of twist for a twist's sake. It's actually, that book is about resolve. It's about answering questions, not suddenly presenting. But that did come on the back of, so Both of You, which is last year's book. All my books are standalone. You just pick them up, read them, that's the story, self-contained. Both of You was a book set just before lockdown. Literally the week, it's a 1 week section of the week before lockdown, because actually the police were under incredible pressure that week before lockdown, because one, they didn't know that we would all go home and make sourdough bread and join WhatsApp groups with our neighbours. They didn't know we'd behave ourselves. They actually were being trained for rioting, and also we didn't know how long it would take to develop the vaccine and get things back in order, So the police were under incredible pressure, but I remember thinking, what must it be like if you're dealing with a crime right now and you've worked on it for maybe a long time and you're trying to solve it, and everyone's saying to you, forget it, because this is your problem now. This global issue is all you can concentrate on. All the resources are going there. And actually, the character in those books, there's 2 women and they both go missing in the same week. And obviously with missing people, every day that goes by, the leads go colder, the chances of finding them statistically are appalling. And by the end of the first week, it's pretty shocking, and you're probably not going to find them, to be honest, unless they want to be found. So I wrote this book, and then I'm not telling you what happens in case you read this one, but at the end, there is something unexpected happens. And in Britain, Most of my readers just were like, yeah, fine, great, that's exciting. Didn't think that was happening. Think that's exciting. And I actually really kind of leave it to you to make a decision on exactly where that's going. Launched in America, and I must have had like 1,000, and I'm not even exaggerating, 1,000 messages saying, no, but you're not leaving it like that, are you? Because you haven't answered everything. And I'm like, yeah, but don't you think it's interesting that you could make your own? And they're like, no, I think that's you copping out. Earn your money, give us an ending. So then, next year's book is an entire novel that is a continuation from both of you.
And it's the only time you've done it.
Only time I've done it, and it has to be completely standalone because none of my readers in the UK ever expect me to do a continuation. So they may or may not read one year, they might miss out and then they'll come back to it, or they might not read them in order. So I had to write this book. It's been super challenging because I had to write a book that offered a complete standalone story that answered all the questions that the Americans thought I hadn't answered. And yet, if you had read both of you in the UK, you were still thrilled enough and felt there was enough forward-propelling information to go on again. So yeah, it was quite challenging.
That's interesting because I had a question here which is literally the other end of a book instead of how things resolve. I was going to say that one thing that not just me, it's not a personal request, but first sentences. You are clearly a big fan of making an impact with a first sentence. And if I'm right, I think this one has a great one as well.
So,
but I haven't got my glasses, so can you read that one? I think that's got a great one. I know you've done it a number of times. If you could read it and then just tell us a little bit about
I'm trying to think what I said now. I've written a whole book since, so, oh yeah.
Well, it is a shocker, isn't it?
Yeah. Chapter 1, Dora. No little girl grows up dreaming of becoming an escort, a sex worker, a whore. Keep that in mind. And that is what I want you to keep in mind the whole way. She didn't want this any more than anyone else wants it for her. And she goes on to say, it's a job, right? A lot of people do difficult work, and many don't like their jobs. That's a fact about being an adult. We suck it up for a myriad of reasons. Maybe because we can't think of anything else to do, or we don't believe there is anything else we could do as we don't have qualifications or opportunities, or simply the energy to draft a new CV. We do, however, have rent or mortgages to pay, electricity, gas, and the lure of the local pub that sells a really average Chardonnay. So we need to make money.
Off you go. But yes, great.
Yeah, my first lines come to me usually in the middle of the night when you're snoring. And
I have my uses, people. It's like,
I'm very grateful. And they usually do come quite complete. And it's very important. I mean, we've all heard the expression, don't judge a book by the cover. And we all know we judge a book by a cover. In life, literally, and in life, metaphorically, it's probably we shouldn't. But a book, tens of thousands of books get published every year, hundreds of thousands actually. So the cover is really important. The back blurb is really important. And if you've held people in, they might open up and read your first paragraph. Yeah. And so that's really important.
Yeah.
I hope that lured you right.
And I'm just going to have a quick time check. Okay, I'll have a little bit more with Adele. I'll just throw this out there. If you want to ask a question, think of it now, and I'll come back to you in just a moment. My final one for you.
That was to the minute.
I know, that's pretty good there, wasn't it? I know.
Do it again.
One slightly, that was interesting things about this particular book. I was going to one general one again about writing. People always like to ask a question about where does your inspiration come from. I'm going to refine that and ask.
Good, because it's a really annoying question.
I'm going to refine that really annoying question. Can you give us a very distinct, specific eureka moment for one of your novels?
Okay, I can.
Like where literally the novel came out that one moment.
Yeah, because the reason I say it's a really annoying question, by the way, for that, where do you get your inspiration, is I think the answer disappoints people because my answer is always, well, life, everywhere, everything I read and hear and the music I listen to and the conversations I have and the experiences I've had and the experiences I hear about. So people find that an unsatisfying answer. So your question's pretty good. Some ideas do sort of come to me as, oh, I'm interested in this theme. So for instance, with this one, I was reading, I think I'd read 3 books in a row on horrible things that happened to women. And I just thought, I want to give these women, and all of them were sex workers. Yeah. I thought, I want to give these women a voice. So that was kind of a slower process. But I think the one that's quite fun to talk about is a couple of books ago, I wrote a book called Just My Luck.
This is the one I was hoping for, so that's good. I can put my notepad down.
Yeah, you're done. Your work here is done. But it's a book about a syndicate of friends who win the lottery. But actually, the week before they win the lottery, they fall out. So before they make £18 million on the lottery, they fall out. And actually, when they had their big fallout, 2 of the 3 couples said, oh, I don't want anything to do with this. And they didn't chip in their money. And then the next week, they used the same numbers, but only 1 couple have paid for the ticket. So actually, legally, it is only that 1 couple's win. But morally, after 15 years of doing the thing together, what do you do? So that idea came to me from, we were at a friend's 50th birthday party, and it was a lunch party, and I'd been sat next to a very old friend that I hadn't seen for many years. And I said to Guy, oh, what are you up to now? And he said, oh, I'm the financial director at Camelot. I was like, oh my God, that's hilarious. Do you give the big giant checks?
And he does.
Because I'm such an intellectual. That was where I was going with this conversation. And he was like, yeah, I do. I actually sign those checks. It's very good fun. And I said, go on then, tell me some stories, because there's nothing better than someone who has a cool job telling you some stories. So he started telling me the stories about the winners and the crazy things they do. And there are some crazy things. There's, I'll just share a couple of them with a winner who had done the lottery every year for 30 years, won, never touched a penny. Not a penny.
Just left it in the bank.
Left it in the bank. Continue doing the lottery. What is that about? What is that? You have now won. You're not using it. What is your thought process here? Another one where she won, and she was apparently in Marks and Spencer's and debating between 2 tops and just thinking, yeah, I can shop in Marks and Spencer's now because I've won the lottery, but still didn't know what to do between the green and the red. And I said, well, how much had she won? And it was 6 million. You know, it was like, you can buy 2 tops from Marks and Spencer's. I'm not a really mathy person, but I'm pretty sure you can. But anyway, he told me all these funny stories, but they weren't the story. And then he just said in like, oh, and we help guide them through it because a lot of people haven't got financial backgrounds, obviously the kind of people who might do the lottery. It's coming to big money suddenly, it's quite a pressure. So we give them independent financial advisors, we give them a whole host of people they can go to, but that's separate to them, and we give them advice on protection and security. And I said, I'm sorry? He said, well, you know, because their kids might go on a kidnapping risk list. Correct.
Yeah, your response
because
is
everyone thinks it's the moment that all your dreams come true, but if actually the thing they said to you is your kids are going on a kidnapping risk list, it's the moment your life falls apart,
for the big winners.
Actually. Yeah. So next time you look at someone and they've won 125 million, it's not that great. Or read Just My Luck and you'll see it really isn't that great. So yes, but we were at the party and I didn't have a pen with me. Normally I have a pen with me. And no one had a pen, and I was just saying to Jim, we need to leave. And he was like, what's the matter? I was like, I've got an idea, and if I don't write it down, I might forget it. Don't let me drink anything else, and we need to leave. But it was really, that was a
And we left
eureka
swiftly.
moment. We left quite quickly.
So that certainly wraps up my time, and hopefully that gave you enough time to think of a question. And we have a roving microphone making its way to the nearest hand that's going to shoot up in the sky.
Yay,
Here we go,
good.
front row. Who's going to be quickest?
I was about to say you don't get to go home early.
No, we just keep
talking.
If
so
you don't
might
ask
as well.
anything, we just carry on.
We began this festival with Anne Cleves, and we're ending it with you. Why is it that women make probably the best crime psychological writers? I'm thinking of Val McDermid, Agatha Christie, Dorothy L. Sayers, P.D. James, J.K. Rowling, of course, with the stuff. Why is it women?
That's a lovely compliment. Personally, I don't think it has to just be women. I think women tend to, historically the novel belonged to women. It was a novelty, that's where the word comes from, and so it wasn't seen as good as prose or playwrights, so they thought, oh, we'll let the women do it, and they literally flicked their hands at that point. And then the women got all over it and became quite, solid in the novel form. I'm guessing with psychological thrillers, and I'm only guessing, but women's experiences are different to men's experience in so much as like it or not, physically, we are threatened significantly more often. And I don't mean, living with domestic abuse or anything like that, which is horrific and the big end of threat. I just mean walking home from a bus stop. Women might think, oh, I'm on my own, where should I walk? Oh, I'll walk down the centre of the road. Probably men don't think that. So all the time, women are kind of often gauging, what's the risk, what's the threat, what could go wrong, how do I negotiate my way through the world? The world is just that bit harder, it's a fraction harder. I think that might be part of it. The other part is we're quite nosy, just saying.
I just wouldn't be interested, right?
You would never ask the questions. So there's a dead body, you go, oh, I hope someone tidies that up. I mean, literally, there wouldn't be that, like, oh, there's a dead body, love, So I think there's the kind of, why and how do people impact each other, and there's that side of it. But I think there are many, many men who write very, very well in this genre too. I think women, certainly in the books that I write, I try and write a balance. This one we've said it's very much from Dora's point of view. I often write from male and female point of view, and I'm the type of feminist, and I am 100% a feminist, I'm the type of feminist that really like men and think that they can do everything as well as we can, and I think I can do, and all other women can do everything as well as men can, and I don't want to see the divisions. So if you are writing in this genre, please feel it's yours too. Don't think it's just a women's genre.
That's a good question, thank you.
Well, that's lovely of you, thank you.
Okay, yes, we'll go to the side here. Okay, Malik.
That was fascinating in terms of the process as well, and 20 books in 20 years is like insane. I'm just wondering, like, if you could go back to, like, after you finish your first novel and you were moving on to the second one, and I'm saying the second one very specifically out of all 20, was there a particular hurdle with the second one after having done the first one that you didn't then find thereafter?
No, but there was on the third. So my second book wrote itself. I was a management consultant, and anybody who's been a management consultant or knows anyone who is, it's approximately a 12 to 14 hour day every day of your life, including weekends. And certainly was then. I hope it's not now. But I gave up the day job when Playing Away got published because it became, so it was published in the year 2000 and it became the debut bestseller of that year and sold 200,000 copies, and it was quite clear I had a chance and I had a career, and they bought it in America and they bought it in Germany, and I was needed. So I gave up the day job and I got pregnant, which I thought was brilliant. This timing was all working out. I was going to have this flexible life with having a book, and it would be great. And I wrote the second one in 3 months because I was used to doing 12-hour days and I still had loads of energy. But I did mention that thing about getting pregnant, right? So then I had the baby, and then I had book 3, and I was trying to write book 3 before he was born. And I did write book 3 before he was born, and I thought I was so smug. And when he was about 4 weeks old, I remember nursing him in the middle of the night and thought, oh, I'll just read the book through before. And I'd held on to it. I thought, I'm not handing it in early because I don't want to give them mad expectations. I'll hand it in when it's due. So I started reading it through, and it turns out it was rubbish. Absolute rubbish. And I was like, what happened? What? I don't know. They could talk about nappy brain, don't they, and brain going to mush. And I don't know. I think being a mother and growing a baby is sort of the same part of your creative brain goes into being a parent as goes into writing a book. I mean, the lies I've told him, that would stack up, and I'm honest, the creative things you have to come across. So, like Father Christmas, yep, he's there, all that. So I think I just wrote this rubbish book. So I binned it in this dramatic way, but I had a 4-week-old baby at that point. And I think I was about 2.5 months off deadline, and it was horrific. And actually it was a blur, and the baby was tiny, and I went past my deadline. Luckily, my editor had had a baby the year before, so she said it was an unrealistic deadline. She gave me another 2 months. but I still only had sort of 4 or 5 months to write the book. I kept the plot, but I rewrote everything about the book. Actually, my marriage collapsed as well, not this marriage. This is doing fine. My marriage collapsed as well, and so I was left with like a small baby, a lousy manuscript, and I had to buy him out of the house. And I was like, yeah, it's not turning out to be the dream everyone thinks I write. And I write dreams, especially then, you know, I was writing romantic comedy. I'm like, yeah, it's not a laugh a minute, I tell you. So it was a real struggle. It was a real struggle. And I do think it was also because the last two, because by then you write a year in advance, so that Playing Away had that big success. Game Over was published when Conrad was a baby in arms and I was taking him around with me. So by then I knew the last two had been successful, and this was the first of the new contract, because you normally get, well, back then you got 2 book deals. And so that was very, very stressful. And they talk about it, don't they, I'm tomorrow interviewing one of your own. I'm interviewing Mel C in Guildford at another book festival, and she talks about her second album. In her memoir, she talks about her second album, Fear, and I think it's a known phenomenon. Second novel, second album. Mine was a bit delayed, mine was third. There have been 2 books in my lifetime that I found really, really tricky to write, but quite often I'm told that they're people's favourites, and I always go, lovely. I think, it wasn't worth it, I don't care how happy it makes you.
Okay, I think we've probably got time for one more question or 2 if we're quick.
We've got 2. We'll
Go
come
in the middle,
to you.
and we'll come to you last.
So I'm currently studying a module at uni that's called sex work. So that was really interesting, everything that you've said. So I was wondering, like, in regards to One Last Secret, did you want to give like your readers a better understanding of sex work as a job?
Yes.
Considering the negative assumptions people have, and what did you find most shocking about the job itself while you were researching
Well, I'm pretty open-minded, so I wasn't particularly shocked, although it turns out I'm not as open-minded as I thought, because I'd come home and say to him, she just kept using acronyms, and then I'd tell him the acronym to get him, and he'd have to tell me what it was. And I'm like, oh, I see that. So I quite often didn't have the lingo all the time. Look, I know what it is, I just didn't have the lingo. I think the hardest thing is, this is what I find most shocking, actually. The girls aren't protected. So it's going to happen. Somebody is always going to pay for sex. Somebody is always going to sell sex. Sex is traded in a number of ways. Sex is traded because he's got a cute smile and you quite fancy him at the disco. That is actually a trade. You fancy him, he fancies you. That is a trade. I mean, there's a terrible bit in this book that when I was reading out to you, you were like, I see. Because it was something like, you know, you have sex with him because 20 years ago you stood at an altar promising you'd love, honour and obey, and he put the shelf up and he's taken your child to university and helped unpack. And he went, yeah, too much detail. So the point is, it is part of being an adult, but they're not protected. So for instance, sex is allowed, you're allowed to sell sex in Britain, right? It's not illegal, unless there's more than one of you in a house doing it. So obviously, if there was more than one of you in a house doing it, it would be safer because one girl could look out for another, a man couldn't attack a girl because there'd be another one in another room, or there might be 6 of them in the house. But you're not allowed that in Britain. That's a brothel and they're illegal. But you are allowed to do it on your own and bring somebody back to your own house, or go back to his house. So that's obviously harder. So I thought that was stupid. Also, you know, he's never prosecuted, it's always you. That seems ridiculous, because if he's paying for it and you're selling it, why, you know, drugs don't work that way. So it's just, there was a few legal things that I think were a bit shocking. There's some bizarre ones, like obviously street walking is illegal. Putting things in telephone boxes is illegal because that can
It's
see
the
as
soliciting
public,
bit.
public nuisance. You wouldn't want children to see that, so that's a public nuisance. I get that, but I think brothels that were beautifully looked after and taxed and people had decent healthcare would be a way to go forward, and it would make women safer. So I think actually the shocking side of it is how we still let our women down, that we don't make them safe.
I refused to be shocked I tried to refuse to be shocked, but also some of the requests some of the women told me about, they're in the book.
Yeah, there's some good stories.
There's some really weird ones. You know, one woman said to me, yeah, he wanted me to brush his hair. And I was like, well, that's not bad, is it? She went, yeah, with his mother's hairbrush. I was like, okay, weird. She went, his mother was dead. I'm like, really weird. Okay, you know, it's really weird. So, I don't know. I suppose that's quite shocking.
Perfect. And then one last question here at the front, and then we will bow out gracefully and hand back over to Dinah.
So I'm nosy too, so it's a bit of a two-parter. So the first one is, what book have you ever read or programme have you ever watched and you thought, oh, I wish I had wrote that?
None. Not because they're not good, because honestly, I'm blown away by other people's stuff, but I love that. Yeah. I love being a consumer of books that I go, I did not see that coming. How brilliant. If I'd written it, I would have known what was coming. So it's actually one of the most exciting things for me when I still get that thorough reading experience. And actually, it's a bit bleh when I kind of go through it going, yeah, I know what she's going to do or he's going to do because I know exactly how I'd write this book. So it's exciting for me when somebody does something. At the moment, we're watching Bad Sisters, aren't we? Are you watching that? It's brilliant. It's really good. I don't know where it's going, and you never know where it's going, and I'm loving that. And it's a bit creatively different. But there's endless books and film and TV that I love being a proper consumer and. So no, although I suppose the royalties from the Bible would have been awesome. Don't know.
So with that in mind, on the same sort of track, you've done romantic novels, historical, and now the psychological thrillers. Any other genres that you'd like to have a crack at?
Well, I'd never say no to things because I never even really set out to go, except for historical, where it was obvious I was changing genre. The others just kind of, I wrote the book I wanted, and then it's normally the publisher will say, well, you know, this isn't a romantic comedy, Adele, because she's dead. I'm like, oh. Yeah. So, or, you know, you just sort of things just change and then they try and market you in a particular way. I think, I always say the only thing I wouldn't try, he's a very big sci-fi fan, and I'm like, yeah, they've got 3 heads, I couldn't care less. But even that, I would perhaps do a dystopian book, so I'm not saying I wouldn't do something in sci-fi. At the moment, I've just signed another 3-book deal, and actually I said to Jim the other day, oh, well, I have to do 3 more psychological thrillers, and he was like, actually, you don't, it's not in your contract, you could do what you liked. They should have probably pinned that down. They might have wanted to give that some thought before they got me to sign that contract. But I'm probably going to do 3 more psychological thrillers. It seems I have stories to tell at the moment. Certainly the next 2 are.
Well, thank you for fabulous questions, people, and for joining us on this final night. I'll say we can give a little round of applause to Adele, and then we'll hand over to Dinah. Thank you.
Thank you, Adele, and thank you, Jim. We really have ended on a high. So I have mixed feelings now. Great session. But it was the closing session, and that's a melancholy thought. But it isn't really the end. We do have festival events throughout the year, so do make sure you're on our mailing list and keep your eyes open, and there will be more events for you to enjoy, and there will, of course, be another festival. So you just have to be patient. And we'll be here again with another great range of authors. So, Adele's now going to be signing some books. Thank you, Adele. She's going to make her way downstairs. So while she's doing that, just one final thank you to everyone. Some of them, of course, not here, but helpers, those who have made the festival a great success. It has been a joy. It's been terrific. So thanks to all.